Eli Turner, a 24-year-old man who had lost his way long before crossing the prison gates. He wasn't dangerous by nature, just a man who had made too many bad decisions trying to escape poverty. Prison stripped him of everything, his name, his freedom, and for a while, his hope. But in that cruel environment, something unexpected happened that would change him forever. Eli met Marcus Hall, an older inmate with a calm, thoughtful presence. Marcus had been there for years, serving life for a violent crime he rarely spoke about. Unlike most prisoners who carried anger in their eyes, Marcus carried understanding. He worked in the kitchen, read old novels, and kept to himself. Eli noticed that when Marcus spoke, even the loudest men quieted down. Slowly, an unspoken friendship began between them, one built on small gestures. Marcus would save extra bread for Eli, and Eli would share stories from his life outside. Over time, those moments became a refuge in a place that offered no peace. Their connection deepened into something rare, something both of them were afraid to name. In prison, emotions were seen as weakness, and love between men was treated with disgust or violence. Yet in the middle of that cruelty, Eli and Marcus found comfort in each other's presence. Their bond was secret but strong, something sacred in a place that had forgotten kindness. Marcus taught Eli how to stay patient, how to read, and how to think beyond the walls that confined him. For the first time in years, Eli started believing he could become someone better. But in a world built on hatred and power, love was a dangerous thing. Whispers about them began to spread among the inmates, mockery at first, then threats. What others couldn't understand, they destroyed. One night, the tension exploded. A group of men cornered them in the showers, their rage fueled by twisted pride and fear of what they didn't accept. Marcus fought to protect Eli, but the attack turned brutal. When the guards finally arrived, the floor was slick with blood. Marcus was gone, and Eli was left broken, both in body and spirit. Days turned into weeks as Eli recovered in the infirmary. The pain in his body was matched only by the emptiness in his heart. For a long time, he wanted to give up. But as he stared at the small notebook Marcus once used to write in, something inside him stirred. He began to write too, not about the violence, but about the love they shared, and the strength it gave him. Each word helped him rebuild himself. Through writing, he found a voice he never knew he had. By the time his sentence ended, Eli had changed completely. He left Iron Gate not as a victim, but as a survivor. His scars became symbols of resilience, and the love he lost became the reason he now lived, to speak, to teach, and to remind the world that even in its darkest places, love still finds a way to exist. Eli walked out of Iron Gate Penitentiary with a paper bag containing a few clothes, a notebook, and a bus ticket. The air outside felt unfamiliar, heavy with a freedom he no longer knew how to hold. The noise of traffic and the colors of the world overwhelmed him. For years, his life had been defined by the rhythm of metal doors and the echo of footsteps in cold corridors. Now, the silence of the city felt even louder. He had survived the violence, the loss, and the grief, but surviving freedom was something new. He moved into a halfway house downtown, a small, shared space meant to help ex-prisoners start over. His roommates came and went, carrying stories of failure and desperation. Some were trying to rebuild, others had already given up. Eli spent most days working in a factory, where no one cared about his past as long as he showed up on time. At night, he wrote. The notebook Marcus had given him became his lifeline. Page after page, he poured out his memories, the pain, the moments of tenderness that had once given him hope. Writing became his way to speak when his voice trembled too much to be heard. Still, there were nights when the darkness crept in. The memory of Marcus's last breath haunted him. Sometimes, he woke up soaked in sweat, his heart pounding as if the attack was happening all over again. He hated himself for surviving when Marcus hadn't. But each time despair whispered, he opened the notebook and wrote until the words steadied him. Slowly, his writing began to shift, from grief to gratitude, from loss to lessons. He began to realize that Marcus hadn't died just to leave him with pain. He had died protecting love, something pure in an unkind place. Eli decided that his story couldn't end in silence. One evening, a volunteer from a local support group visited the halfway house. She was looking for someone willing to speak at a community event about life after incarceration. Most men avoided her eyes, but Eli felt a quiet pull. When his turn came, he stood in front of the small audience, trembling. His voice cracked as he began to read from his notebook. He spoke not about crime or punishment, but about love, violence, and the strength to heal. The room fell silent, and when he finished, people stood up and clapped. For the first time in years, Eli felt seen, not as an ex-convict, not as a victim, but as a human being who had survived something bigger than himself. After that night, more invitations came. Schools, recovery centers, even churches wanted him to speak. He didn't talk about prison life to shock people, he talked about the human heart and its ability to endure pain and still love again. Each speech became a tribute to Marcus, a way to keep his memory alive. Eli realized that his suffering had not been meaningless. It had shaped him into someone capable of turning tragedy into purpose. The past no longer defined him, it guided him towards something greater, a life built on truth, forgiveness, and the quiet power of resilience. Months turned into years, and Eli's story began to travel farther than he ever imagined. What started as a single speech in a small community hall grew into a movement of hope for people who had been forgotten by society. He visited prisons, youth centers, and shelters, speaking not from books or theories but from the scars that marked his body and heart. People listened because he spoke the language of pain, the kind that doesn't need fancy words to be understood. They saw in him a mirror of their own brokenness, and through his honesty, they found a reason to keep going. But success brought new challenges. The more he shared his story, the more memories he had to relive. Every time he stood before a crowd, he had to open old wounds. Some nights he sat alone in his small apartment, staring at the wall, wondering if healing others was costing him his own peace. The applause faded quickly after each event, and when silence returned, he was left with the ghost of Marcus beside him. He sometimes spoke out loud to the memory of the man he loved, asking if he was proud, if all this pain was worth something. There was never an answer, but in his heart, Eli felt a quiet yes. One afternoon, after giving a talk at a local college, a young man approached him. He was shy, barely 20, and his eyes held the same fear Eli once had when he entered Iron Gate. He thanked Eli for speaking about love between men without shame. He said it was the first time he had heard someone talk about it with courage. That moment hit Eli harder than any standing ovation. It reminded him why he kept going, not to be admired, but to be understood. He realized that his story wasn't just about survival, it was about giving others permission to live their truth without fear. Still, the world outside wasn't always kind. Some criticized him online, calling him names, accusing him of glorifying sin or violence. Others mocked his past. At first, their words stung, reopening the same wounds that had nearly destroyed him years ago. But instead of hiding, Eli wrote even more. He turned their hate into paragraphs, their insults into lessons. He refused to let bitterness poison him. Instead, he learned to answer cruelty with compassion, to show that hate only grows in silence. Each hateful message was proof that his message mattered. In time, his speeches were recorded, shared online, and featured in interviews. People began to see him as a symbol of transformation. He didn't chase fame, it found him through honesty. And even though his past remained heavy, he carried it differently now, not as a burden, but as proof that even in the darkest places, a person can rise. Eli knew he would never escape the shadow of what had happened in Iron Gate, but he also knew that he didn't need to. The shadow reminded him of where he came from and why he would never stop speaking for those who still lived in darkness, waiting for a reason to believe that love could survive anywhere. Eli's life began to settle into a rhythm, one that balanced his work as a speaker with the quiet solitude he needed to stay grounded. He had moved into a small house on the edge of the city, surrounded by trees and silence. For the first time, he could sleep without the sound of metal clanging or footsteps echoing down long corridors. Yet, even in peace, the memories found him. Sometimes he would wake before dawn, sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, and watch the sun rise. Those moments reminded him of the mornings he used to imagine while locked away, the idea that light always finds its way through, even if the world tries to shut it out. One morning, as he flipped through the old notebook Marcus had given him, he realized it was almost full. The last pages held words that no longer came from pain, but from acceptance. Writing had become less about surviving the past and more about shaping the future. He decided to collect his writings into a book, not a story of crime or punishment, but of redemption and love. He titled it The Light Beyond Iron Gate. When it was published, it didn't make headlines, but it reached the people who needed it most. Letters began arriving from strangers, former inmates, victims of violence, young people afraid to be themselves. Each letter carried a piece of the same longing Eli once had, to be seen, forgiven, and understood. Eli read every letter, responding to as many as he could. Some stories were heartbreaking, others were full of hope. Through their words, he saw how deeply pain connected people, how universal the desire for healing truly was. He realized that Marcus's love had not ended with his death. It had continued through every person who found courage in Eli's story. That thought filled him with quiet strength. The pain hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined him, it guided him. One day, a message arrived from Iron Gate Penitentiary itself. The warden invited him to return, not as a prisoner, but as a guest speaker. The idea terrified him at first. The thought of walking through those same gates again made his chest tighten. But after a long night of reflection, he knew he had to go. Returning wasn't about revisiting pain, it was about reclaiming power. When he entered the prison years later, guards and inmates alike watched in silence. He spoke in the same room where fights once broke out daily. His voice was steady as he told them that healing doesn't erase the past, it transforms it. When he finished, a long silence filled the hall. Then, slowly, one man stood and began to clap. Others followed. Eli looked around and realized that the place which had once buried him in fear had now become the ground where he stood in strength. Walking out of Iron Gate that day, he felt lighter. The world outside was still uncertain, but he finally understood that redemption isn't about escaping your past, it's about making peace with it. Years passed, and Eli's name became quietly known in circles that valued truth over perfection. He never sought fame, yet his story continued to travel. Documentaries, interviews, and podcasts wanted to feature him, but he accepted only those that honored the message, not the drama. He had seen how easily tragedy could be turned into spectacle, and he refused to let Marcus's memory be reduced to shock. His purpose had always been deeper than attention. It was to show that love, no matter where it grows, can change everything it touches. Eli spent his days teaching writing workshops at community centers and halfway houses. He helped others turn their pain into something meaningful, guiding them to use words the way he once had, to survive. Many of his students were former inmates who carried the same kind of shame he once knew. Some had hurt others, some had been hurt, all of them wanted a way to move forward. Eli told them that forgiveness wasn't a gift others gave you, it was one you had to learn to give yourself. Slowly, through shared stories, tears, and late-night conversations, he built a small community of people healing together. One evening after class, a young man lingered behind. He reminded Eli of himself at 24, lost, fragile, and hiding behind silence. The man handed him a folded paper with a few lines written on it, a poem about fear and love. Eli read it and smiled, recognizing the same raw honesty that had once poured from his own pen. He encouraged the man to keep writing, to never stop. As the student left, Eli sat alone in the empty classroom, the paper still in his hands, realizing that this was what Marcus had wanted all along, not for their love to be remembered as tragedy, but as transformation. Through helping others find their voices, Eli was keeping that love alive. As the years went on, he began to travel less. The constant movement had taken its toll, and he wanted peace more than recognition. He returned to the small house by the trees, where the mornings were quiet and the sunsets painted the sky in colors that felt like closure. He still received letters, still spoke occasionally, but now he spent more time in reflection. The world had changed, society had grown more open, more willing to listen to stories like his, and though there was still hate in the world, there was also progress. That gave him comfort. On the anniversary of Marcus's death, Eli visited the hill overlooking the city, a place he went to when he needed clarity. The wind was gentle that day. He closed his eyes and whispered a thank you to the man who had taught him what love could survive. He no longer carried guilt, he carried gratitude. The pain that once consumed him had become a reminder of how far he had come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Eli felt something like peace settle within him. His life had begun in darkness, but it had led him to light, and that, he realized, was the true ending Marcus would have wanted.